I never thought my wife's funeral would be the moment my daughter came back to take what wasn't hers. Joan died on March 11th. 4 days later, the house still smelled like flowers and cold food no one wanted. I poured a glass of her favorite Chardonnay and set it on the table across from me, her spot. I wasn't ready to move it. Then I heard heels on gravel. "Hey, Dad," Emily said, stepping inside without knocking. "I'm here to help manage everything." Emily. 6 years without a word. No calls during Joan's chemo. No visits. No hospice. Not even a speech at the funeral. And now here she was, like she'd never left. She looked around the kitchen like a real estate agent, smiled at the countertops, poured herself a glass from the same Chardonnay bottle I'd opened for Joan. She held it up to the light like a buyer inspecting a product. "Still buttery. Wow," she said. "This place must be worth a fortune." I didn't answer. I just watched. She wore Joan's lipstick, Coral Sunrise, the one Joan stopped wearing when the radiation made her lips split. Emily must have taken it from the vanity after the burial. She sat across from me like it was a business meeting. "So," she said, "when do we start? You've got the estate now. I figured I'd help move things along. I've cleared a few weeks." I just looked at her. "You're here to help?" She smiled. "Of course. You shouldn't have to handle all this alone." She wasn't here to grieve. She was here to harvest. The vineyard stretched across 300 acres behind her, Joan's pride. The old Mercedes sat in the garage, still waxed from the last time Joan drove it. The trust, the accounts, the land, all left to me. Emily didn't know that yet, but she would. I stood, took the glass from her hand, and poured it down the sink. She didn't flinch. "You're 4 days late," I said, "and 6 years too." She blinked but kept smiling. That was the moment I understood. My daughter wasn't home to mourn. She was here to claim. 4 days earlier, after the last mourner left and the sun dipped behind the hills, Joan's lawyer handed me the envelope. Heavy paper, wax seal, her will. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it said. Joan and I had spent enough late nights at that kitchen table, sipping coffee, talking through every contingency. She'd made her wishes plain, not just once, but over and over. Still, I read it alone that night, slowly, every word. The vineyard, all 300 acres, the house, the car, the accounts, the business stake, everything to me. No mentions, no footnotes, no "in the event of," and no Emily. She hadn't forgotten her. Joan was a lot of things, but forgetful wasn't one of them. She made a choice, one that felt heavy and hollow at the same time. I remember the last time Joan tried to reach out. 2 years into Emily's silence, she wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter. I watched her seal the envelope, hands shaking. She never got a reply. That envelope came back 3 weeks later, unopened, returned to sender. After that, Joan stopped asking where Emily was, stopped checking birthdays, stopped pretending. That made it easier, I guess, for her. I never could fully turn off the part of me that hoped. But Joan, she grieved the living and then moved forward. That's who she was. And now, with the vineyard mine, so were the decisions. The legal chain was clean. Deed, title, trust, all updated before her final round of treatment. She'd made sure of that. What Emily didn't know, as she sat sipping wine and eyeing the cabinets, was that I wasn't just a grieving old man in a quiet house. I had power, real power, with signatures, passwords, control. Joan gave me everything, not as a gift, as a responsibility, because she knew Emily would come back, and she knew it wouldn't be for closure. 6 years. That's how long it had been since Emily last came home. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, Not even when the chemo turned Joan's voice into a whisper and her bones brittle as twigs. The silence wasn't an accident. It was a choice, stretched across time like a closing door. I left voicemails. Joan wrote letters. We got nothing but silence back. At first, we told ourselves she was just busy. A promotion, a move, a phase. Then came the wedding we weren't invited to. The last name change Joan found out about from a cousin's Facebook post. That's when hope quietly packed its bags and left the house. Joan never said it out loud, but I think she grieved Emily long before the cancer came back. And now, here she was, walking through the kitchen like it was hers, giving herself tours, opening drawers like she was checking inventory. I watched her hand glide along the marble island we had installed the year before Joan got sick again. She paused in front of the wine rack, pulled out a bottle of Cabernet Joan had labeled by hand, part of our 2019 reserve. Emily didn't even blink, just nodded and said, "Wow, these must be worth something now." She didn't say Mom's vintage. She said, "These." Then she walked out to the garage, heels clicking on tile, and stood in front of the car like it was waiting for her. The Mercedes 280 SL, Joan's baby, still spotless, cherry red. The same one we drove along the coast that summer Joan finished radiation. The one she always said would go to someone who understood. Emily ran her hand along the hood and smiled. "Can't believe she kept it in such good shape. This thing must be worth a fortune." That was it. Not, "She loved this car." Not, "I remember riding in it as a kid." Just the dollar signs in her head. What Emily didn't know, what she never asked, was that Joan and I had been planning for this for years. 5 harvests ago, when Joan first got the diagnosis, she stopped playing pretend. That's when we called David Whitman, her lawyer of 17 years. Not a flashy guy, just sharp, thorough, and loyal. The kind of man who dotted every I and buried copies of every document in 3 different places. We met once a month after that. Kitchen table, coffee, paperwork, passwords. Joan didn't want surprises. She knew where things were headed, and she wanted me to be ready, not just to grieve her, but to carry her work forward without being blindsided. She walked me through everything. The CRM we used to track wine club memberships, the harvest logs, vendor contracts, real estate filings, even her email folders, organized down to the last invoice. Joan left me more than property. She left me a system, a wall, and a key to every single door. Emily looked at me like I was still the man who forgot to put on sunscreen at vineyard events, who mixed up Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. She assumed I was still the guy in the background, the husband who smiled and paid bills and stayed out of the way. She thought this was her moment, that I'd be too tired, too sad, too sentimental to stop her. She didn't realize she was walking into a house built on granite, not grief. I had deed access, trust control, banking authority. Joint ownership? No longer. Joan made sure of that. Everything transferred clean the week before her final stay at hospice. Emily didn't know I had the codes, the passwords, the lawyer on speed dial. She thought she could come in with a glass of wine and a fake smile and start making plans. But she'd made one mistake already, treating this place like a prize. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to argue. I'd learned long ago that quiet pressure is what cracks the marble. Let her think I was standing still. The next morning, just after 9, David Whitman pulled into the drive. Same car he always drove. Dusty Volvo wagon, papers stacked on the back seat like usual. No fanfare, no briefcase swinging. Just David, in a navy sweater and scuffed loafers, looking like a man who'd been carrying other people's secrets for half his life. Emily was in the sunroom, sipping from a glass of Sauvignon Blanc like it was orange juice. She saw him through the window and squinted, probably expecting a surveyor, maybe a delivery. David stepped inside without knocking. "Morning," he said, voice calm but clipped. "Coffee?" I nodded. "Pot's fresh." He poured himself a cup, then glanced toward the sunroom. "That her?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He took a slow sip, eyes still on her. "She moved in fast. She hasn't unpacked," I said, "but she's circling." He nodded once, like that told him everything he needed. Then he pulled a folder from his coat. Thin, just a couple sheets. He laid it flat on the table and opened it toward me. "Estate's locked," he said quietly. "Trust is sealed. Titles confirmed. Accounts updated. No probate risk, no wiggle room." I exhaled through my nose. Not relief. Exactly. Just confirmation. "And her?" I asked. David tapped the folder. "Nothing. No claim. Not even a mention. Joan was explicit. Your sole beneficiary and executor. End of discussion." We both turned as Emily finally stepped into the kitchen, barefoot, smiling like someone about to pitch a deal. "Morning," she said. "Didn't know we had company." David looked her over, slow and deliberate. No handshake, no introduction. "Emily," he said flatly. She blinked. "Have we met?" David's mouth pulled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You sent me a letter once, demanding access to Joan's early estate filings. I declined." "Oh," she said, the smile flickering. "That was just a misunderstanding. I was worried about Mom." David raised an eyebrow. "That must have been difficult, worrying from such a distance." She didn't answer, just turned back toward the sunroom, glass in hand. David sipped his coffee again. "Looks like the problem already moved in," he muttered. I didn't say anything, just watched her silhouette in the glass and thought about how fast a storm can look like sunshine. David left after an hour, quiet, confident, surgical. Everything buttoned up, everything documented. And I sat there alone in the kitchen, staring at the list he'd left behind. Bullet points and legal codes that looked like insurance but felt like armor. I'd never drawn battle lines in my own home before. Never had to. But now, I had a goal. 3 of them, in fact. First, maintain full legal control of the vineyard. That meant keeping Emily away from any operational documents, accounts, or conversations with staff. She couldn't sniff leverage if I never left a door open. Second, block Emily from accessing or liquidating any part of Joan's estate. That meant tightening digital security, changing every password, even the ones I didn't think she knew, alerting the bank to flag unusual activity, freezing potential points of entry, every valve, every tap. Third, expose any fraud or manipulation she tried to pull, because she would. I knew that now. The fake sweetness in her voice, the way she moved through the house like it was already hers. She wasn't just here to help. She was here to inherit while I was still alive. I printed copies of the trust, the deed, the will, marked them, labeled them, locked them in the fireproof safe in my office, just in case. That afternoon, I walked the vineyard. The vines didn't care about any of this. They stood in neat, obedient rows, soaking up late spring sun, just starting to bud for the season. Joan used to call this her favorite time of year, when everything looked dormant, but underneath, everything was fighting to bloom. I used to think she was just being poetic. Now I understood. When I got back to the house, Emily was in the dining room, her laptop open, a spreadsheet up. "Just organizing a few things," she said. I didn't ask. I didn't look. I just nodded, walked past her, and went straight to the garage. Because I had a 4th objective now. Let her think she was winning. It started with a drawer. I was looking for Joan's old ledger, the black one with the soft spine and her notes in red ink, when I found something else in the study. Buried under a stack of tax documents was a real estate folder. I opened it without thinking, expecting old property records. But this wasn't old. The top sheet was an appraisal report, dated 2 weeks ago. Our vineyard, Fields Estate, 312 acres, it read, which was already wrong. Joan never called it an estate. It was a vineyard, a home, not a brand. But that wasn't the part that caught my eye. At the bottom, written in looping, overconfident handwriting, target, $2.8 million. Push for no less than $2.5 million. Emily's handwriting. I know it because I'd seen it for years, on birthday cards, on sticky notes left in the kitchen during high school, on thank you letters she used to write before she stopped saying thank you altogether. She'd circled the number 3 times, like she was practicing a sales pitch. I flipped through the rest. Broker notes, market comps, a timeline for preparing the property, digital staging estimates. One document had tentative close date, August, typed in bold. She hadn't even asked about Joan's ashes yet, but she'd made sure to price the land before the casket was cold. I sat there for a long time, the file still open, my thumb pressed against the edge of the paper hard enough to leave an indent. I wasn't shocked. That's the worst part. Somewhere in me, I'd already known. The wine, the car, the estate. It wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. She'd come here with a plan, a quiet one, with timelines and dollar signs. I closed the folder, slid it back into place, and turned off the light. She wanted this to go quietly, wanted to pretend she was just helping until the paperwork landed in her hands. But if she was leaving breadcrumbs, she clearly didn't know how carefully I swept my floors. Now I had proof she was circling a sale. The next morning, I logged into the vineyard's CRM system, something Joan and I managed together for years. She'd kept it clean. Orders, member lists, shipping history, everything labeled, tagged, archived. I hadn't looked at it since the funeral. But now, I had a reason. I typed in the admin password Joan created, Cabernet 1978. It worked on the first try. Under Recent Activity, a new user had appeared, created 2 weeks ago. Name, Emily Fields. Title, Estate Consultant. Access level, full. She'd given herself access, not requested it, assigned it, as if the whole operation were already hers. There were 3 outbound emails from that account, all to the same address, a luxury real estate firm out of Santa Rosa, the kind that sells old Napa estates to hedge fund families who think wine is just another asset class. One subject line stood out, rebranding options for legacy transfer. I clicked it open. Let's position this as a generational shift, she'd written. My father is grieving but agreeable. We'll need valuation estimates and visual assets prepared ASAP for pre-market exposure. Tentative timeline, June. I'll handle family optics. My jaw clenched. Agreeable. That's what she called me. A grieving, agreeable speed bump. I checked the system logs again. She'd downloaded every membership list, every vendor contract, every sales report, all while Joan was dying in the next room. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the wall. I'd spent decades building this vineyard, weathering late frosts, equipment failures, bad harvests. Joan had kept it alive with sheer will, and now our daughter was planning to flip it like a vacation rental. But she'd made one mistake. She thought I wasn't paying attention. She thought I wouldn't even know where to look. But I did. Every corner, every login, every inch of this place. I printed the emails, highlighted the signature, photocopied the headers. Then I slid them into a red folder and labeled it Emily Phase 1. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. That Friday, we had dinner with the Thompsons, vineyard neighbors, friends of Joan's for over 20 years. I made roast lamb, just like she used to. Emily insisted on setting the table. Halfway through the meal, she raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, eyes gleaming. "It's a new phase for the vineyard now that Dad's, navigating it solo." She said it like I was already packing boxes. The Thompsons exchanged glances. I kept my fork steady. Then she turned to them, smiling like a hostess. "Actually, I've been stepping into operations, big shoes to fill, but someone's got to." Tony Thompson looked at me, confused. "That right, Rich?" I held his gaze for a beat. "It's her first week back in 6 years. She's getting reacquainted." Emily laughed. Too loud. "Well, I've been reviewing projections, vendor lists, and long-term potential. There's a lot of room for growth if we structure things smart." She was performing, not for me, but for them, establishing authority, testing how far she could stretch the narrative before I snapped. But I didn't snap. I watched. Then she dropped the real line. "I've actually scheduled a tour with a few boutique wine investors next Thursday," she said, sipping her wine. "Figured it'd be smart to gauge external interest." My jaw tightened. She never asked. Never mentioned a tour. Tony set down his glass. "That seems fast." Emily shrugged. "Opportunity moves fast. I just think the vineyard deserves to grow beyond tradition." She was laying groundwork, positioning herself as the new face, the new voice, the new vision. She thought being bold in public would force my hand, that I'd cave to save face, or look like I wasn't in control. She didn't realize I didn't mind looking silent. Silent isn't weak. It's focused. When the guest left, she lingered in the kitchen, humming while washing a wine glass she didn't pay for. I stepped into the doorway. "Investors?" She didn't turn. "Just exploratory." I nodded once. "Next time, clear it with the owner first." She glanced back. I thought I was. Then she smiled. And that was the moment I knew. She wasn't testing boundaries. She was erasing them. The receipts started stacking themselves without me even trying. Saturday morning, I checked the vineyard's voicemail. I'd nearly forgotten about it. An old landline, barely used anymore. But someone had left a message. "Hi, Emily. This is Brent with Sonoma Valley Realty. Just checking in. We're still waiting on your signature for the exclusivity agreement. Let me know if you want to keep the $2.8 million as your firm ask." I rewound and played it again. He said your signature. Not mine. Not ours. Hers. I saved the message. Then opened my email. I hadn't noticed it before. A confirmation from a photography studio. Attached was an invoice for a pre-sale media package under the project name Fields Vineyard Legacy Rebrand. Billed to Emily Fields, estate consultant. Photos. For marketing. The tour she mentioned over dinner wasn't a test run. It was phase 2. She'd been moving forward like the ink was already dry. I searched the cloud drive Joan and I used. In a folder Joan never touched, I found new subfolders. Mock-up logos. Marketing pitches. Heritage meets modern luxury. Phrases Joan would have hated. Phrases Emily never would have dared say to her face. The more I clicked, the more it unraveled. Contacts. Quotes. Correspondence. She was laying the groundwork for a full-scale handoff, one she had no authority to make. But she wasn't just reckless. She was calculated. She used Joan's name on half the vendor emails. My mother and I are transitioning the family business. Trying to lend herself credibility through the woman she'd abandoned. I printed everything, highlighted dates, emails, names. Then I called David. He picked up on the second ring. "How deep?" "Neck deep," I said. "And still digging." I heard him sigh. "We'll need more than paper. Something she can't talk her way out of." "I've got that part covered," I said. "Just tell me when." He paused. "Thursday. Let her run the investor tour. Then we hit back." I looked out the window. Emily was walking the rows, sunglasses on, phone to her ear, pointing at the vines like they were hers to give away. She had no idea she was leaving footprints in wet cement. Tuesday afternoon, David called. His voice was tight. "We've got a problem, and it's uglier than we thought." I met him in his office that evening. He didn't waste time, just laid a document on the desk. It was a codicil, a legal amendment to Joan's will. It looked official. Same letterhead, same signature, same witness lines, except I'd never seen it before, and neither had Joan. David tapped the bottom corner. Filed 4 days before her death. Declares Emily as co-executor. Equal authority. Equal claim. My hands went cold. She was unconscious, I said. Joan couldn't even hold a pen by then. David nodded. Exactly. The signature looked close. Too close. But there were flaws. Joan's looped J was wrong. The tail was short. And the witness notary? A man named Victor Heller. Dead, David said. Died 3 years ago. Stroke in, 22. I pulled the obit myself. They'd used a dead man to notarize a forged document. Emily hadn't just played opportunist. She forged legal power. I cross-checked the state registry, David went on. The notary ID on the stamp doesn't exist. And the witness signature line? Blank. It was rushed. I sat back in the chair. You think she did it herself? I think she had help, he said. But the handwriting is hers. We'll confirm it. Is this criminal? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. It's fraud, he said flatly. And if she tried to use this to claim or sell anything, it's prosecutable. I stared at the paper. The nerve, the calculation. Joan had fought cancer with grace, with grit, with stubborn damn dignity, and our daughter forged her name on the way out. Not for memories, not for closure, for control. I want this stopped, I said. It already is, David replied. She has no power. Not legally. This document means nothing, except that we now have evidence. I looked at the fake signature one last time, then slid the codicil back across the desk. Thursday, I said. She gets her stage. David's eyes narrowed. And then? And then we bring the curtain down. That night, I sat alone by the old barrels in the cellar. The air smelled like oak and dust, and the ghost of every harvest Joan ever celebrated. It was our quiet place, a refuge when the world got loud. Now it felt like the front line of a siege. The fake codicil sat on the table beside me, folded, untouched. I hadn't brought wine, didn't need it. My chest was already full, with rage, with shame, with a weight I couldn't quite name. Emily hadn't just come for a piece of the vineyard. She'd come for the whole thing. She'd planned it, written it, filed it, forged Joan's name and tried to rewrite her last wishes like they were an inconvenience. I stared at the chair across from me. Joan's chair. Worn arms. A soft indent where she always sat with her notebooks, scribbling harvest notes, laughing about the new irrigation pump that sprayed her clean off her feet that one summer. She should have had 10 more years here, at least. But cancer didn't negotiate. And now Emily, the same daughter who couldn't be bothered to show up, had come back to rewrite the ending. What cut deepest wasn't the forgery. It was how easy it seemed for her, how little it all meant. No photos of Joan in her room upstairs. No flowers left on the grave. No pause in her voice when she said, quote, the estate. Just business. Just leverage. Just the next play. I closed my eyes and remembered Joan's voice from that last week. We were in her room at hospice. The vineyard just barely visible through the window. Promise me, she said, barely audible, you'll protect it, even if it's from her. I'd promised. Not knowing what that would mean. Not knowing it would hurt like this. But tonight, I understood the cost. I hadn't just lost Joan. I'd lost what little daughter I had left. Wednesday morning, David sent the final draft, a single sheet, clean, professional, titled Strategic Vineyard Transition Session, Thursday at 10 a.m. Emily thought it was her show. We let her. I left it on the dining room table where she'd find it. She picked it up during breakfast, read the title, and smiled like a kid handed the keys to a candy store. "Perfect," she said. "Exactly what we need." She spent the rest of the day prepping like she was CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Walked the rows in heels too thin for gravel. Took photos. Practiced talking points out loud in the mirror. I heard her through the guest room door. Phrases like generational pivot and modernization strategy. She had no idea the room she was walking into had already been rigged. Thursday came. The boardroom sat ready. Oak table. 6 chairs. Joan's framed wine region maps still lined the back wall. The air smelled like dust and old wood in silent judgment. David was already there, sleeves rolled, folders stacked. 2 Vineyard staff members joined, Tony, our head vintner, and Louisa, Joan's operations lead. Emily walked in like she owned it. Black blazer, burgundy lipstick, binder tucked under her arm like a briefcase. "Thanks for making time," she said brightly, as if any of this had been her idea. "I've put together a plan I think you'll all be excited about." She launched in without hesitation. "Joan built something incredible," she began. "But the industry is changing. Markets, demographics, distribution, all in flux, and I believe the vineyard is ready for its next chapter." David said nothing, just nodded for her to continue. She passed around pamphlets, her rebrand mock-ups, estate development ideas, luxury marketing angles. She had a slide deck on her tablet. Buzzwords. Graphs. A partnership model based on investor diversification potential. And through it all, I didn't say a word. I just watched. Every sentence was another brick in the wall she was building around herself. And every page she handed out? Another piece of evidence in the folder, David had labeled fraud preliminary. She thought it was her big reveal. But tomorrow we'd show her what a real presentation looked like. The boardroom went still after her pitch. Tony leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Louisa said nothing, eyes locked on Emily like she was watching a stranger in her own home. I stayed quiet. She mistook that for approval. Emily smiled and smoothed her blazer. "Now, I know this is a lot, but these are opportunities. Boutique investors are hungry for footholds like this. We're sitting on something too valuable to stay sentimental." That word. She'd said it like an insult. David waited a beat, then opened the manila folder in front of him and slid a copy of the will to the center of the table. "This is Joan's final, legally binding testament," he said. "Filed, verified, and protected under trust. It names Richard Fields as sole executor and beneficiary." Emily's smile faltered, just slightly. David slid another document forward. "This," he continued, "is a forged codicil, filed with the state 4 days before Joan's death, supposedly naming you as co-executor." Emily sat up straighter. I only submitted what Mom gave me. She wanted." "No," David said, calm, surgical. "Joan was unconscious the week this was signed. The notary listed has been deceased for 3 years. The stamp number is invalid. The handwriting matches yours." Tony's chair creaked. Louisa folded her arms. Emily looked around the room, eyes scanning faces for a lifeline. None came. "I was just helping," she said quietly. "I was preparing options in case Dad felt overwhelmed." David set down the investor emails, the CRM logs, the pre-sale invoice, the fake title she gave herself, estate consultant. "I believe you were preparing something," David said, "but not for his benefit." I finally looked at her, dead in the eyes. "I buried your mother 7 days ago," I said, "and you came here with a sales pitch." Her mouth opened. No sound came out. The silence that followed was heavy. Not dramatic, just real. A pause where everything settled, where the game ended. Emily blinked hard and reached for her binder. No one stopped her. David didn't rush it. He let the silence stretch, just long enough for Emily's confidence to deflate. Then, one by one, he laid the papers out across the boardroom table like a slow-motion collapse. First, Joan's original will, dated, notarized, witnessed, clear as day. No mention of Emily, no ambiguity. Next, the forged codicil, same document we'd reviewed in his office, now with enlarged comparison scans. Joan's real signature versus the fake. Different slant, inconsistent loops. A forensic analyst's notes underlined in red. David spoke calmly. This document was filed illegally, using a notary stamp from a man who's been dead since 2022. That alone constitutes fraud. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came, just a shallow breath and a slight shake of her head. He continued, "These are screenshots from the Vineyard's CRM, a user account created by you, listing yourself as estate consultant with full admin access. That's identity misrepresentation." He placed another page down. "This is a voicemail from Brent Morales at Sonoma Realty, confirming your attempt to sign an exclusivity agreement for the property." Another, an invoice for pre-sale photography, paid using Joan's account, 2 days after her burial. And another, emails to investors, stating that your father was grieving but agreeable, which, to be clear, he was not informed of at all. The pages kept coming. Mock-ups, marketing language, timelines, all branded Fields Vineyard, Legacy Rebrand, all tied to her. Emily's hands stayed folded, knuckles white. Her face had shifted from defensiveness to something worse, calculation, like she was running scenarios in her head and couldn't find a safe exit. "I was just trying to prepare for the future," she said softly. David didn't blink. "You forged a legal document and impersonated an estate official. That's not preparation. That's prosecution material." Then he turned to me. "Richard, at your discretion, we can file this immediately with the district attorney, or handle it privately, with full estate control reaffirmed." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at my daughter. This version of her, polished, practiced, and unrecognizable. David leaned forward, hands folded over the damning stack of paper. "Ms. Fields," he said, voice level, "this is document fraud. At best it's a civil matter, at worst it's criminal. You have no legal claim to this estate. None." Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence was doing the damage now. "This vineyard," he continued, "belongs solely to your father, as does the house, the business, the assets, everything. You are not an executor. You are not a stakeholder. You are not a consultant." She looked at me, still trying to read my face, to find something soft. But I had nothing left to give. "You are no longer welcome on this property," David said. "We'll follow up with a formal trespass notice, enforceable by law." Tony stood, slowly, like a man who had seen enough. So did Louisa. She didn't speak, just walked out. Emily's hand hovered over her binder, still trying to decide whether to defend herself or disappear. I finally stood too. "You want to know the hardest part of all this?" I said. "It's not the forgery, or the lying. It's that your mother knew you'd come back like this." That made her flinch. "She left you out of the will, not out of spite, but out of clarity. She gave it all to me so I could protect it. From exactly this." Emily's voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting her legacy. I thought—" "No," I cut in. "You thought you were entitled. You thought absence could be erased with ambition, but this place was never yours to take." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. She gathered her things in silence. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she walked out. No grand exit, no rebuttal, just the quiet sound of something breaking. David closed the folder and exhaled. Well, that's done. But I knew better. Nothing about this was over. The legal part? Maybe. But the wound, the one that comes from watching your child turn your wife's dying wish into leverage, that stays. Word spread faster than I expected. By Friday, the staff knew, not through gossip, just through absence. Emily didn't show up for her morning walkthrough. Her tablet, her notes, her blazer draped over the sunroom chair. All gone. I didn't have to explain much. Tony came into the tasting room around noon, wiping his hands on a rag. She's not coming back, is she? No, I said. She's not. He gave a single nod. Good. That was all he said. But it carried weight. 18 years he'd worked this land with us. He'd seen Joan on her feet and in a wheelchair. He knew what it meant to call a vineyard home. Louisa didn't say anything either. But when she updated the operations log, she changed the admin access back to just me and left a note. No outside parties permitted in core systems without written approval. I didn't ask for that. She just did it. Even the seasonal crew seemed to sense something. They were quieter, more respectful. One of the young guys, Marcus, barely 20, asked if he should cancel the Thursday investor tour Emily had set up. I told him it was already handled. No one defended her. No one asked where she went or why. And that silence, that absence of protest, said everything. Joan used to say people reveal themselves twice, when they arrive and when they leave. Emily arrived with a smile and a plan. She left with nothing but a closed door behind her. That night, I walked the vineyard at dusk. No agenda, just space. The sky was bruised purple, and the vines whispered like they always had. Steady, indifferent, alive. I thought about Joan, her hands in the soil, her laugh echoing between the rows. I thought about Emily, and how far she'd drifted from that. And I thought about the staff, quiet, steady, loyal, standing without words, like a wall that didn't need to announce itself to hold the line. They didn't need proof. They saw who stayed. The fallout didn't stay quiet for long. By Monday, David had filed a formal fraud report with the county. Not dramatic, just methodical, notarized statements, copies of the forged codicil, the CRM logs, investor emails. A clean, professional case. We may never see charges, he told me, but this locks the file. She can't resurface in 6 months pretending nothing happened. It wasn't about punishment. It was about finality. The next step was the property. Joan's Mercedes had still been sitting in the garage, untouched since the day of the funeral. I finally took the title down to DMV, had it retitled solely in my name, removed Joan's co-ownership, removed any ambiguity. No loose ends. The estate trust was updated too, per David's recommendation. We added language to specifically disqualify any beneficiary who attempted legal interference. Emily's name wasn't just absent now. It was barred. 3 days later, a formal notice was posted on the vineyard gate. This property is under legacy stewardship. No unauthorized entry permitted. Some people might have seen that as dramatic. I saw it as necessary. Emily hadn't just trespassed physically. She'd trespassed on memory, on trust, on grief. I had no intention of letting her test the fence again. I also issued a statement to our vineyard members and distribution partners. Short, simple, clear. There has been no change in ownership or operations. The vineyard remains under the sole stewardship of Richard Fields, in honor of Joan's legacy. Thank you for your continued trust. I signed it myself. No logo, no branding fluff. Just my name. The response was swift and quiet. Thank you notes. Old friends stopping by the tasting room. Tony coming in early to double-check shipments without being asked. No one said her name. That was the part that struck me. No one needed to. She'd made her choices. So had I. The doors were closed now. Locked. The papers filed. The trust sealed. And for the first time in weeks, I slept with the window open. Cool vineyard air drifting through the screen. No scent of rot or tension. Just soil and wind. Peace. Late September. The vineyard had turned that golden rust color Joan always loved, where every row looked like it was on fire just before the harvest. I took the Mercedes out for the first time since the funeral, tuned it myself. Tires still good. Engine purred like it remembered who it belonged to. Joan's old grape-picking basket sat in the passenger seat, exactly where she used to toss it after morning walks. I didn't move it. I drove slow along the edge of the southern rows, past the oak tree where we'd celebrated her 60th with a bottle of late-harvest muscat and a pie Tony's wife had baked from scratch. The air smelled thick, of earth, of ripening fruit, of endings, and yet it didn't feel like grief. Not anymore. I wasn't waiting for a phone call from Emily, not hoping for reconciliation, not wondering what I could have done different. I'd done what Joan asked. I protected it. The vineyard. The legacy. Her memory. Even when it meant letting go of blood. That's the part they never tell you. That sometimes protecting what someone built means standing against the people who share your name. And still, I didn't feel bitter. I felt steady. The rows stood behind me. Quiet. Alive. I parked under the old oak. Shut off the engine. Let the silence wrap around me like an old coat. I whispered her name once. Not to get an answer. Just to remember how it felt in my mouth.